don't know how I'm calling in. Turn my headphones up. What? Sorry, I changed my I don't know if I'm coming in clear because we get some weather outside, so I don't know if it messes with my signal or anything. If it messes my signal, just let me know, and I can turn it off and come back to my time when it comes in clear. I know as much as the music be annoying, choppiness can be annoying, so please just let me know if I'm not coming in clear. So I'm turning headphones up. But I'm in Psalm 18, and what will say the subsidized JKS, which I'm not reading from here, will be verse number 1, because don't say the heading that the church gave it is not, the word, but the heading that was in what one would surmise or suppose would be the original copy. They would say that's verse number 1. So it would say a Psalm of David. And that's just the prefix right there. So this is to the chief musician. So I don't know if he had somebody else that would play better music and everything, but yeah, I just go it alone for the most part. I know this stuff isn't going to be easy for anybody here, so I'd be one of a kind on all that. But when it comes to this Psalm of the Messiah, Psalm 18, he say, "The pangs of death surrounded me, and the floods of ungodliness made me afraid. The sorrows of Sheol surrounded me, the snares of death confronted me." The earth, look at this, chapter 18, verse 7 of the Christian. It says, "Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills also quaked and were shaken because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils, devouring fire came from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed. The heavens also came down with the darkness of his feet, and he rode upon the cherub. He flew with the wings on the wind." So this David is flying on the clouds. As they said, you would see Jesus, but Jesus would be a little bit different because this was when it would say in the Jewish, and hopefully this will be the last time I say the J word. I'm going to refer from here on out into two distinct groups, and this can be very confusing. From here on out, I'm only referring to the two groups as nation and nations, and this is very confusing. But this is the way it has to be, because there is no such thing as the Goyim is anymore as there is such thing as the United Nations or the nations for that part. The Talkitim, are Chittim, the nations, the ethnicals, is the generations and the genes of all the families. So you could think of it in terms of Genesis chapter 12 and verses 2 and 3. So when they talk about this nation, which they won't specify to whom they're speaking, because they will say it's referring to Judeans 3,000 years later, 4,000 years later, or what have you. And what Judean would even mean at that point, when they clearly come later than the Israelites, And if you have a problem with uh, understanding this, it's because you look at Ezekiel 16 in the prodigal son, where they refer to whom was first in birth, because Leah's children came before Rachel's children, because Rachel was without children for a long time. And I don't know how Benjamin even fits into this. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Jerusalem was not even Judean territory. It was clearly in the realm of Benjamin, and all the Benjamin being this a tiny area right between Samaria and Israel, Judea and Ephraim. But going back to Joshua, but any of that is rather irrelevant, because we don't know when the final reaction was, and it was likely even for Joshua in the earliest of books. Could have been, in the days of Ezra. I mean, how were they carrying all the scrolls? And then when we see Ezra had to explain everything to them, the most basic elements of the law for the people who were identified law. So when you take books like that, and you take Esther and uh, like these kind of exilic books, it's kind of confusing for the most part, because this is before the time of Jesus, opposite to the time of Jesus, and after the time of Jesus, and that's namely the Judeans, who were not the Israelites. And the story of Kings doesn't record something that's found in the history books. There are histories of Israelites, but the term Judean is from the Babylonian period, and the Babylonian period, namely the Neo-Babylonians, you can think Nebuchadnezzar for simplicity. That wasn't even the Babylonian history where there was the most notoriety, and this continued on after the time of Jesus in the Sassanid Empire, which was largely the Achaemenid Empire. And this was a division of that territory. They were well communicated, and the even later, much later, when Umar took it over, the fact that he took such swaths had a lot to do with the fact that Alexander the Great had already unified all the area. And so there was Greek Hellenism spread all the way to India by Alexander the Great. And that was a status quo, and for which not only the Bible was written, namely the Septuagint, not the fake Masoretic, which was 1,000 years later, but that also the Bible and the New Testament and all that was born into the Greek era. But it was largely split in as much as the Byzantines and the Sassanids, or the Romans and the Eastern, and the power of the Eastern was namely in Persia. And though there was some Babylonian control for a time period, the scriptures only harkened back to that time period. They weren't written in that time period. And so this distinction between Judean and Israelite is largely an expropriation of the term Israelite by the Judeans, and how they were a faction amongst Israelites, and how um, their Moshiach had and this isn't something found in the Bethel system that was destroyed with in Shiloh in the north uh, before the time of Kings. That the Samaritans are kind of right to say that Joseph and Jacob and all them had their wells in the north, but it doesn't really matter. And to prove that Ezra was in a time of the Persian era, I shouldn't have to say too much, but I mean, Esther 2, Nehemiah, they all start with similar headings of how great the Persian king is, and thus say Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdom. Oops. I was thinking of Esther, but it doesn't really matter because the Persians wanted to seem benign enough to be inclusive therein, but if you just look at Ezra, it says Ezra chapter 1 verse 5, or verse 6, that and all around them they had strengthened the hands of the vessels of silver and gold and goods and beasts, and besides were willing offering. Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, for Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth to Jerusalem, even those that Cyrus the king of Persia brought forth by the hand of Mithridates, the treasurer, and numbered them in the Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this is the language was the language of the East. It was our Aramaic, and this is what Arabic and Hebrew and a lot of other languages, the Chaldeans and things like the Chaldeans and Arabic, when it comes to a lot of religious words, there's cognates. You would say, same words like rest in peace or peace be with you, and they sound very similar between Chaldean and Hebrew, so, and I'm in the middle of listening to a debate that happened, I think, a couple of days ago between Captain Skills Tazariak and Judas, cult tied to the choicest vine, Maccabeus. And they both say they're real Israelites, and Judas Maccabeus, he takes advantage of all this confusion, and he would get you to believe that his ancestors is the people of the book, and Captain Skills to Zariak would do the same thing, they just, but the thing is everybody been doing this for the longest, like, and nobody ever would have if the Christians hadn't made it their book. Like, I mean, who would have thought? Like, who would have thought that it would become state religion of the Roman Empire, and then spread, through that, and to where most of the people would be heavily influenced by it, and this has caused so much, because it's the weirdest thing, and this is why Martin Luther is a tragic figure, because what did it do? It created a lot of its own problems. And that's what it intended to do in the first place, because it was always meant to be contradictory. It got its roots in the Gnosticism of Christianity, of like Marcionism and stuff, where the demiurge was the creator. And this is one that's solipsist and partial and vengeful and jealous. And anyways, it's a complete inversion on purpose. It was to be the destruction of the temple, to be the end of the festivals, the new moons, the feasts. And you can say that's anti this or whatever, but that's how come they have the hardest time blocking. And they'll probably block me after this video because I'll probably say something real stupid. But like Christian videos, because by the same argument, and they will try to be duplicitous about it. They will try to talk out of both sides of their mouth. They will, but the same argument is that it's religion. You can't discriminate people on religion. So a lot of Christians, for instance, I was listening to Berean Bible Church, and the pastor there made a really strong argument using Romans 2 and a couple other places, how the people of the book are the church. Okay, it's plain and simple. And that's a cut. And it's always meant to be a cut, especially the Gospel of John. But you got to understand that that Psalms, like I'm reading Psalm 18, was supposed to be a cut. It was supposed to be the Tikkun Olam. And Tikkun Olam is that they believe that the Shekinah is with the Moshiach. And when the Moshiach comes, this is the resurrection and everything. And the Pharisees have been teaching that for a long time, since before Jesus. So Jesus was speaking directly to a lot of these things. And so when in Psalm 18, when he's talking about he was riding on the clouds, he wasn't riding on the clouds. They're going to call us the idolaters because, we have a human like Jesus, when the Gnostics don't even believe he was a human in the first place. But nonetheless, Christians in the Orthodox tradition, have this human right on the clouds, and they think this is the most sacrilegious thing in the world. Like, he puts himself up by God, like God, crucify and let his blood be on our hands and everything. And so for saying he's going to be riding on the clouds when I'm looking here, and then this all happened when he died. The pangs of death surrounded me. The stars of Sheol surrounded me. The earth shook and trembled. He was angry. The demiurge was angry. He bowed in the heavens also and came, and he made darkness with the secret place, the canopy. So this is tohu vavaupu, the dark waters, formlessness and void, because light and order was in the Moshiach, and so the obviously this is God doing it when it's got lightning and thunders and he's darting across the sky, like he's like the God with like the long hat with the thunderbolt, so he took but he kept the law or something. They want you to think, because that's what it means to be a nation. Because in Genesis, say be a nation. So say, I will make is Wisaka Gudol, as Duvid would say, if that's a Kamal, it's Gudol. So I will make you a Gudul. No, they say the Wab is a Ba, so they would say Gudubu, Gudubu, which means great. I will make you Gudubu. I don't know where the law went, if it says into, but somehow Gudubu. Oh, it's at the end of the. No, Goodall already comes with the L at the end. Oh, here's the law. In Gui, Gui, Gaboy, Gaboy, Lagaboy, Lagaboy. Or as Gallagher likes to say, Abagugay. So, here's Abraham being called a nation, but when we get to Psalm 18, verse 43, it says, "Deliver me from the gainsayings of the people; they shall make me head of the Gentiles, a people whom I know, people who knew not served me." So in the King James, it was "Thou hast delivered me from the strivings of the people, and thou hast made me the head of the heathen. A people whom I have not known shall serve me." So they've been able to capitalize on this a lot. That if there's a word like Gentile in English, that or heathen, that obviously, it goes to say there's a word for it. So this solves the problem of universals, and it's no longer some Neoplatonic extraction. It's some actual tangible thing, because it has history, written by Penguin Press. Very prestigious and pretentious. And so when they have these important figures, like they can write the book, and that's going to make your history. Penguin Press. And so they would think, oh, if there's a word for it, King James has a word for it, then it must be a real thing. But this is confusing to people. Just as Judith Maccabeus can rightly say this is King James Bible is in your Goy English Bible, you could say, well, it says the same thing in your Goy Hebrew Bible, that because it just means nation. And it's evolved into meaning this different thing, but when hopefully by explaining it, I can expose it for what it is, and we can get over the fact that there are these words in English, and they do not mean what they want you to think they mean. So first, let me show that it says right here in Psalm 18, verse 43, you made me, that's to see me, the head, La Roche of nations, La Goyim, La Gaboyim, or whatever they would say. So the M makes it plural, so it's the same word. Gaboy, Gaboy. According to the Yiddish. And it's not a different word at all whatsoever. Like I don't know what kind of nerve or chutzpah or audacity they would get off to talk about it. Oh, it's a means of animals or flight of locusts or like. But us, we're humans. We come from Adam Kadmon. The the real people, and all you. It says right here, "A people I have not known shall serve me." This is serve the Moshiach. That is the people that shall serve Moshiach. This is in Psalm. This is in the incantations that they would chant. This is something a spell they would try to weave on a regular basis. And I would say that there is truth to the claim that they would want to be a separate nation, and this is seen largely in the scenes and followers of Hillel and everything, that they wanted to set themselves apart, and this is what they say on their bar mitzvahs and everything. They say, set yourself apart, be different, and at the same time, they would say that don't be like the other people, don't assimilate, but on the other side of the mouth, try to say that it would be a hateful curse to say that they're not of your nation or have allegiance to another nation in any way, shape, or form. That would be a curse, and anti-blank or anti-Shemitism or whatever. That it's like, this hateful, vile thing to suggest that they would want to be part of another nation in any kind of way and not as patriotic as you would be, but at the same time, on the other side of the mouth, would be saying at their festivals and prayers and incantations and coming of age rituals, to be a separate nation, to set yourself apart, to consider, and even the name of the religion is just saying I'm simply a part of this nation, and so they get off on this kind of technicality and run with it, and they all do this, like they say God because God is Moshiach, and Moshiach is the nation, and they speak in a corporate sense. And so when they say, our ancestors did this and that, they're talking religiously. They're not talking about some, you would think that, like, because when you go to Numbers and you go to Genesis, all the places in Torah, Ezra had worked it in that you can go through generation after generation and everything. And so, yeah, he would want you to believe that, but this high intellect, for when the time when nobody could read and write, can record all the generations, from Adam, from the first man, they just were all of a sudden writing, or they had great this oral tradition and nothing got messed up, but every generation since then has been completely lost, so no, there's no continual, even in the priests, like they replaced each other all the time. That's what the Game of Thrones is. You don't have the same successive person for of power for thousands of years. King James himself, his father wasn't, or maybe his grandfather or whatever, wasn't a man of great notoriety, and so which is not how it works. And of course, Henry VIII didn't have any sons, and so there's all these extenuating circumstances and everything, and that doesn't make somebody, if you have a daughter, or less of a person, or if, according to whatever immigration standards they have to prohibit the Arabs, that you would have it be from the mother or whatever it was, but I think the from the mother has a lot to do with the rabbis not being home very often, and the brothers watching their wives, and these polyandrous families like Abraham that would have people like Eliezer in the house that were not even from their own loins or whatever, but still part of their family and stuff like that, and live right marriage and everything. And so when it was your brother's child, your nephew, and it was in your own house, it was close enough, you'd end up providing enough for him enough that he would survive, and so that became an evolutionary strategy or an advantageous strategy for a group of nomadic people enough to continue on this tradition, for whatever it's worth. And so it says, as soon as they hear of me, this is the Moshiach, as soon as they hear of the Moshiach, the foreigners submit to me, the foreigners fade away, that's being extinguished or exterminated, and come frightened from their hideouts. And so this is, what the Moshiach does to Edom. Like, he goes and he destroyed all the male seed from Edom, so that this is what David did with Joab. You can read about it in the book of First Kings, that they talk about it posthumously. But it says, you have made me the head of the nations. So this is the role of the Moshiach, is to be head of the nations. And this is a cut that the Christians got in by making Christ the head of the nations, but this was not a point to be different than the Moshiach of Psalm 18, but to as would point to Christ being that, not some separate Christian Moshiach, but the one for the nation, and not the nations, eventually for the nations through Paul and everything. But that wasn't how Christ came. Christ in his earthly mission came to his own, and his own received none. I'm sorry, I need a drink of water. But I can still talk to you and walk with you for a second. But, if you look at my last video, I hope you did. That one was clutch. That Christ came for Israel. Paul said that he died for those, under the law. Because, remember, Pilate washed his hands and found no fault with him. And he was going to let him go. But they had said, we have a law, and so he came for his own, because his own had what was called Yom Kippur. And if you go to Leviticus 16, you can see how they can sacrifice, either way you look at it, whether it's for the nations, it still came from the priest. The Levites sacrificed two different ones. One had its blood in it. That one was for the nations. But that wasn't a sacrifice for their sins. That wasn't for their sins. That wasn't for the nation's sins. The scapegoat went to the nations, but that was to carry the sin to the nations. That was to the demons, the acknowledgement of Satan or these other gods, Azazel, that he was this scapegoat was going to go to and take Israel's sins from Israel. The priest would put the sins on the scapegoat, and they would send it out of the camp, out of the city. And so that one went to the nations, but it wasn't for the nations, for their redemption or anything. It was for the redemption of Israel. And so, but even if the blood sacrifice, because that's what it obviously indicated too, with all the blood. I mean, look at the movie The Passion. It's a bloodbath, but That's an Israelitish custom. A lot of people would hang the animal because you would be able to save the blood. But for whatever reason, the same people who had the best knives earliest, I don't know if it was pretentious of them or not, but they just believed part of being separate and being different had to do with some slicing. They would slice their foreskin, they would slice animals' necks before they would eat them and stuff, and so that became part of their customs. Even before there was ever such thing as a Judea. Judea got its start during exile. That was a Babylonian term. That's the first time in history you see it, is in Babylonia, this term. And scripturally, you don't see it until there's no Israel anymore. After 720 BC and the Neo-Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom and did a replacement or whatever, 2 Kings 17, later on, like 2 Kings 21 or something, like the very last couple of few chapters, when Nebuchadnezzar's emissaries came to the wall, so the very end, it had something along the lines of, he spoke to him in Judean. So I mean, scholars would reckon that it was a dialect that he could, that was of a similar enough language that he could inflect, the vowels in such a way that was more. There wasn't. Yeah, he understood Judean. They had Don't get me started. But that was the first. That's the first time you see anything like that. Sorry, let me just. I don't know what I just said for the last couple minutes. So ignore the last point I made. I'm not sure what I'm saying right there. So. But that is not a term for today. Like that has nothing to do with today because there are thousands of years since then and now, and what happens now is what anybody could say, and that's because when the Germans got Christianity, it was much later. It was a Roman thing, and people to the south and north of Rome didn't necessarily adhere to it. And people to the north would be the Germans or the Poles, and the people to the south would be the Berbers, and you would also have Levantine people that weren't feeling it all the way. And it happened to be the most prosperous people of that time period. And that's what happens because of exceptionalism. Because this all comes down to bias, solipsist, subjective exceptionalism. Now, check out this headline. This is from May 28th, 2021, The Times of Israel. It says, Progressive Democrats pan anti-Semitism while lumping it with other forms of hate. From Sanders to the Squad, many lawmakers apparently unwilling to decry attacks on the nation without also denouncing Islamophobia or all forms of racism. So if you start saying this isn't fit, So like they need to be special in every kind of way, and this is the same thing. Ask Dr. Brown, because Ask Dr. Brown, just like Fruchtenbaum and all the being messianic, they'll say I'm messianic of the nation, and that doesn't even make any sense, because messianic it doesn't mean what they think it does, because the ones that believe in the Psalm 18 of this Alexandrian Moshiach riding on a white horse, conquering the nations. This one is Moshiach. So Messianic is the ones that follow this one. Christians have inverted it. So Dr. Brown isn't talking about anything that hadn't already been decided. Christianity was already first with the nation. That's where it started. He came to his own. And so to take some John Hagee argument of dual covenant is preposterous, because that's not how Jesus spread the message. He went to his own people. That's the apostles were his. They went to their. Peter wrote to the tribes. So it's preposterous to argue what John Hagee does. That there is no separate gospel, like to it doesn't make any sense. The gospel was to the Judeans. This is nonsense. So this is what Dr. Brown will advocate. This nonsense. He'll say that he is messianic, and that's going to make him different than what? Every Judean is messianic. Every Christian is messianic. What does that even mean to be messianic? That doesn't make any sense. There's not one single Christian and not one single Judean that is not messianic. So what the heck is he talking about? He's messianic. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you say you're not allowed to call yourself messianic? Just call me messianic. When they're all messianic. We're all messianic. Doesn't make any sense. So how is he a Judean? Because he's not loyal to the United States? Is that how he's Judean? I don't understand. Is he part of our nation, or is he part of another nation? That's what I want to know. So and I don't know if you knew, I don't think he's going to air it. He debated Vincent Bruno, and Vincent Bruno just today was just cut off left and right. He gave a good example, because Dr. Brown said, give us one example of this actually being taught by a single Rebbe. And he gave him Schneerson saying something that seriously implied exactly what Bruno was saying, and Dr. Brown completely ignored it. Then he went to a second statement where there wasn't such an implication that was drastic, and then he picked it apart and then refused to hear anything else after that. So it was just terrible. Dr. Brown was being a complete jerk. And as Vincent said, an a-hole, and I agree. And Vincent Bruno has a good friend who he's on air with on YouTube a lot, called Claire Carr. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she has the same argument. where she talks about Spinoza, and that's Baruch Spinoza, or Espanola or whatever, and so to understand why his name is Espanola, you got to understand this history of people being against the Romans, namely the Berbers, the Ottomans, and the Germans, or the Poles rather, and so, but this happens to do with when they get to be at a very prosperous and exceptional time, namely the Spanish, and has a lot to do with inequality and enslaving of other people and a lot of other terrible things. So it's not pretty, but there would not have been such room for people who hate Christianity to exploit it so much without these seeming contradictions, which aren't really contradictions when you really understand it. And this is what Martin Luther got into. And this is the same problem the what's it called? This is the same problem the Millerists have. And all the Zionist evangelicals, they all have the same problem. And the Zionists are taking these misunderstandings and really going to town. And it's quite unfortunate because people don't understand, and people don't understand what they don't understand. Take, for example, the Muslims. The Muslims think they understand what Israel is, but don't even understand what Israel is because they don't read about what Israel is from the same books that the Christians read. They don't read the Bible. Very few Muslims actually read the Bible. Very few Christians even read the Bible. Anything Muslims would? And especially the fact that Muslims happen to be in countries where people have to strive to survive, because of the conditions geopolitically as well as environmentally and stuff like that, to assume that everyone's a Bible scholar would be absurd. And so, but the thing is that the Quran does mention Israel in a way, and they believe it's a completely comprehensive of book that they think they understand. So them thinking they understand has been really easy to dupe them on terms of the veritable who's whom in the dispute. And this is where Martin Luther got into a lot of problems. Martin Luther thought it was the most important thing to do as Dr. Brown does, even though Martin Luther he didn't believe he was them folk, where Michael Brown does. But I don't see how one has more valid of a claim than the other, because most of the places where Judeans have come from has not been Judea in any stretch of the imagination at all. There are various groups in Tunisia and Ethiopia and Somalia and India and everywhere else that say that they, from the Bible points to this verse and that verse, that these people, the Afghans, they believe that they're the people of the book, because there's all these places where you can reference that and think that, but it has a lot to do with people thinking they're exceptional, and more than anything being anti-Roman, anti-Christian, and trying to undercut the argument. And this is the problem Martin Luther got into. That to be Christian is to evangelize to the only people that don't want to hear it in any kind of way. So your whole religion is to try to get people to give up a nationality, a supposed nationality, when their only religious identity is to keep that nationality. While they're trying to argue that to call it a separate nation other than your nation is a trope and hateful and all this, and if you do hate them, it's a unique hatred that's not like other hatreds. It's and if they're Christian and if they're a unique kind of Christian, they're not like any other kind of Christian, and they can't even call it a Christian. They're a messianic. And Clara Ka, she's got this whole opinion that Baruch Espinosa is a secular one of the nation, and that doesn't make any sense because as Judaeus cult tied to the choicest vine Maccabeus said that God provided them the nation in 48 because there was an embargo from the United States, and they stole the weapons from God's power, and which wasn't true. The Czechs gave it to them, the communist Czechs, and as Fruchtenbaum said, they were atheists and agnostics, and so you want to seemingly claim that it was God's provision, because that's what I'm trying to tell you, that they believe that the nation is Moshiach, and that Moshiach is Yahweh. And so when that when the when the Palestinians, when they saw that the Palestinians were making the desert bloom, in as much as there was desert everywhere, but there was a nice section around the Galilee and the Mediterranean that oranges grew well in, and there was all kinds of immigrants to this area, and it was like but the thing is because they see it as one nation, you would think that it was a continuation of ancestry in terms of DNA, when that's not the case, because this continuation happened through a long process. Here's what happened. I'll break it down for you step by step. When it mostly started amongst the Berbers, and the Berbers had been suppressed during the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars where the Romans defeated the past order of the world, and the past order of the world is what the Old Testament is. They hate Romans, and so North Africa was against Christianity, especially when Rome was no longer present in Africa, and there was no popes coming out of Africa and anymore, that they turned on them, especially Morocco. Morocco's symbol is the Star of David. That's where it comes from Morocco. And this is where the Sephardics come from. They don't come from, we got kicked out of the Middle East and we came over in boats, slaves to the Romans, and we were just in the Roman Empire for 1,000 years, and then
for 1,500 years we were in the Roman Empire, in France and Italy and Spain, but mostly in Spain somehow. And then all of a sudden, Ferdinand and Isabella wanted to kick out, us poor people of the nation. We were living in your nation for all these years, and then all of a sudden you kicked us out after 1,500 years, and that's not how it happened. Byzantium spread all the way far east, and the people of the steppes, Caucasians, were peripheral. They're not going to just say we're Christian, and that's one of the most obvious undercuts to Christianity is Judaism. And this is what people have done even in Christian societies, especially rebels, like all the British Israel that's in the EDL. And the EDL is just like the JDL. Nationalism is the same, but they want to act like, oh, we can be national, we can be for our nation, but you all don't even have a nation. You just are all part of the nation. So you could be under the International Workers Nation or the Caliphate, so you're all just, you have your little different regions, but you're still part of a greater nation, but you're not part of our nation. So look at this map. We just want this little sliver, and you can have the rest. That's your nation. This is our nation. This is the green line, but we'll go out of the green line, and you can't come inside because you'll blow us up. And that's just what it is. So it's this false dichotomy that somehow they dupe you to think that God made us, a different people, and this is Kabbalism. And they want you to believe that there's separate souls, and that they are all different sparks of the divine soul to come to, as it says in 1843, rule over the nations. And Jonathan Greenblatt's going to be like, it's really terrible how they would say that we would want to rule over the nations, when it's simply in the scriptures. And it's the great replacement theory, the anti-Semitic trope that there's a desire to not let you have nationalism. But meanwhile, Jonathan Greenblatt doesn't want nationalism for us. He doesn't want us to be doing things that are best for our nation, the United States. Jonathan Greenblatt doesn't want that. Jonathan Greenblatt wants only what's best for another nation. And he's going to say, I hate him, or I'm committing some hateful trope while he's advocating for another nation, always doing things if it could hurt our nation to benefit another nation, and yet it would be hateful to say that he doesn't. And this is what they would throw you in jail with ISIS about, or ISIL, is if you said, oh, I'm part of an Islamic nation, I'm not part of your nation, so people can go, get paid tons of money from U.S. government will give their government money, and their government will give citizens of our country money to fly over there and join their army, risk their lives fighting for them, and yet that to say that there's a claim of dual nationality is hateful. And when that's the name of the game, that's the name of the religion. That's what Jonathan Greenblatt is all for. That's what Naftali Bennett and Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman and all of them are for. More walls, more division, us versus them. Be separate, be different. We just want to join you. Ezra 4, get out of here. You'll have no part in the world to come. And so in the timeline, there was in the peripheral of Russia was Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan was a European people, a Caucasian people, and there had been long rivers coming around from the Caucasus. There was great ice caps that would melt, and people could survive if they could. And this happens to be where this. If you look at the Hyksos, they look similar because of coincidence. That the Hyksos were from, believe it or not, the Caucasia, but they had migrated, not just one dude, not just one generation, but many families over the course of many generations, and they probably end up fighting each other and not even realizing there's the same nation from way back when because they didn't write it down and they lost that history. So it didn't really even matter at that point. And even if they did, they would probably make up some story about how, oh, there was, this king and that king, and they some prophet tore some cloth and he gave 10 pieces to this king and 2 pieces to that king, and that explains it. Let's fight, and then the rest is history. They fought for the next 10,000 years or something, and according to the book, or not 10,000 years, but armies of hundreds of thousands over the course of hundreds of years or whatever it was. It doesn't really matter. So this peripheral Caucasian group, they ended up doing some pretty vulgar advances, and they had some big bulges out of their territory, and this ended up being they were considered a force to be reckoned with, and long had been, way back into the Alexandrian Romance. These ideas we have of Gog and Magog and stuff come from the Alexandrian Romance. And this was this idea that there's this Caucasian force, and the Greeks, although they're Caucasian, didn't think of them. Oh, those are just us. We're just the same people. That's not how they saw it. So, whatever the high point of the mountain was, the people on the outer side were considered to be walled in, and what the Muslim called Gog and Magog, Yajuj and Majuj, and so it became part of Muslim eschatology too. That they're the Caucasians, being back there, but they didn't have record of the fact that Muhammad was actually Caucasian. That this had happened long before, and had probably happened in successive waves. So all the people around there look about kind of the same, because The Hyksos were just the beginning of many, many successive waves of Caucasians that took over the Middle East. Syrians look incredibly Caucasian. And because of the Punic Wars and the Romans and other things, they basically pushed a lot of the darker people to Timbuktu. And it's just sad but true. And so, unfortunately, this is actually what the Bible tells of. This whole Canaanian narrative of the Canaanites aren't a real people. There was a real people that were like the Canaanites, but they're called the Amorites. And the Amorites were just like the Israelites. Actually, probably they were the Israelites. I mean, the Israelites were probably just a type of Amorites, you know. So they wanted to separate themselves from them, but that their history, the one of the Israelites, is that there were people in the land, and this is because it was an old land, and so when these shepherd kings came down the runway through the desert, they had it rough. You know, they were surrounded outside, like all huddled together with, like, you know, they were like the Bedouins. And the Bedouins being like that has been pretty successful over the period of time. Namely in the Saudis, but well before that, the Bedouins took over right before the Mamluks or something, that they had controlled even the Berbers, and so the Berbers did something similar that these Caucasians did, and they just all of a sudden arbitrarily decided that they were part of the nation, and so these large swaths of Berbers um, had no idea that a similar thing was going on in the Caucasian Mountains. And but the Caucasians had no idea what was going on with the Berbers, and the Berbers are where we get the Kabbalah from, and the Kabbalah and Talmud and all that has been spread through an undercut of the Romans. That people from the East that hated the Romans in the Middle East, they would use the Berbers to come around and swoop up into Spain. And Spain had basically turned on the rest of Europe by allowing tons of Murabs and Berbers and Moroccans to come up into Spain for merchandising. And the Muslims loved the so-called people of the nation because of that merchandising, because Muslims can't do interest, they can't do slavery, they can't do all these other things that are seen as cruel, but the people that are part of the nation can. So the caliphs and all the people like Saudis today, they love wine and women. You know, the kings do, the Saudi kings, the princes, they love wine, women, and bowling. So that's what they did back then too. The really prosperous ones, they would like that the merchants could sell them the right women and the right slaves and the right gold and the right different silks and different things, and be able to communicate with people in the Berber areas and everything. But they weren't communicating in Hebrew. They were, you know, intellectuals, learned sophists, and that's why they found this cut of Christianity. And that's always been the thing, is to undermine Christianity. And it's not that, but you know, okay, so the Berbers were spreading into Spain, and Spain was prospering, and it hit a feverish pitch when they came to, like, around the Inquisition, the founding of America, the Moranos, and a bunch of other things of this sort. And so this is after the Enlightenment was ending or something, or the beginning of Enlightenment or something, that they started to see things a little more radically, and with the founding of the New World and everything, some sort of nationalism set in. And nationalism wasn't really a thing before because people didn't drive very far, and the king's power was only as far as the arm could stretch. And so, therefore, the nation wasn't as big of a thing. But somehow, with the Russia spreading and England spreading, it's set maybe with enclosures and stuff like that, and this kind of existence, and it changed the course of history. And this is why there are these certain terms like Gentile. So this was somebody before this time period I was just talking about, the Inquisition. Before this time period, according to etymonline.com, when you type in Gentile now, it was before this time period used of non-Christians. So you're trying to tell me, oh, this is a word from time immemorial that means that just this the way God intended it. No, it just simply means clans, people, families. And so that's how it was used, the same way, because that's what the church is. The church is the congregation. Like Ezra had a congregation, the assembly. Just as in the wilderness, there's assembly. It's not a different term, as Kendra would so like you to say. And but when they would so it meant gentiles meant pagans, heathens. After the 15th century, 16th century, but this is the same time period as Martin Luther. And Martin Luther, when they try to tell you, when Calvin and Luther and Zwingli and all them try to tell you the church wouldn't let us read the Bible, the church wouldn't let us read the Bible, they're talking about the Hebrew Bible, because they were curious what these Polish people of the nation were wanting to say, because he believed in this purpose, that this was he was a priest that had a bunch of kids, and he wore a funny hat, and he got fat, and none of it makes any sense. It's quite, and he was very, very influential. So it's quite ironic. But if you look at the term gentile, it's the same word as gentle, and it means highborn and noble. It doesn't mean heathen. Gentle comes from the same word. So gentleman. That's what it means. It doesn't mean heathen. There is no word that just means, oh, there's this nation and that nation. It's as old as English, Yeah, King James would make you want to think that, but King James is from the Protestant tradition of Martin Luther, who believed that the only thing that mattered is what the nation believed. That's how Martin Luther looked at it. And then when he got to the end of his life, he ate every word and wrote long volumes of who cares what they think. Obviously you. It was a tragedy. So the ones in Russia didn't like the Rus because the Rus spread their culture. Rus nation spread. The Russians spread. So the people in Kazakhstan thought they were like losing their empire from the West, and then that was after they got pushed west from the Mongols in the East. So they lost out, even though they were like a strong, scary army. They ended up losing, and that the religion wasn't with the Kabbalah and the Talmud, it was just to undercut Christianity. They were what we would call Karaite, which are different than the Rabbinites. And so this all changed in that great era of Spain, 1492. 1492 was led. It's detailed in this book by Varna Schambart, and he talks about this one historian from the nation that wrote how Columbus and the whole endeavor was basically people looking for the New Jerusalem, a particular people of the nation. This nation do not see themselves, he says. But they do not. Do they not deny their obvious characteristics and assert that there is no difference between them and an Englishman, a German, or French? So they do not see other people as living beings, but only as subject citizens or some other abstract conception. It comes to this that they behold the world not with their soul, but with their intellect. The result is that they're easily led to believe that whatever can be neatly set down on paper in order to write by the aid of intellect must be a necessity be capable of proper settlement in actual life. How many of the nations still hold that the national question is a political one and are convinced that the liberal regime is all that is required to remove the differences between the nation and its neighbor, the nations? It is nothing short of astounding to read the opinion of so soundly learned a man as the author of one of the newest books on the national question. That is the whole of anti-Semitic movement during the last 30 years was a result of Mar during the the conception of the universe is in the mind of such an intellectual people must perforce have been that of structure well ordered in accordance with reason. By the aid of reason, therefore, they sought to understand the world. They were rationalists, both in theory and practice. Now, as soon as strong consciousness of the ego attaches itself to the predominating intellectuality in the thinking being, he will tend to group the world around the ego. In other words, he will look at the world from his point of view of end or goal or purpose. His outlook will be teleological or that of practical rationalism. No peculiarity is so fully developed in the nation as this. There is complete unanimity of opinion on the subject. Unanimity. Most other observers start out with the teleology of the nation. I, for part, regard it as the result of extreme intellectuality, in which I believe all other national peculiarities are rooted. In saying this, however, I do not in the least wish to minimize the very great importance of this nationalistic characteristic. Take any expression of the national genius, and you will be certain to find a teleological tendency, which has sometimes been called extreme subjectivity. Whether or not the Indo-Germanic races are objective and the Shemitic subjective, certain it is that the nation is the most subjective of all people. The nation never loses himself in the outer world, never sinks to the depth of the cosmos, never soars in the endless realms of thought, but as Jelinek well puts it, dives below the surface to seek for the pearls. He brings everything into relation with the ego. He is forever asking why, what, for what will it bring. His greatest interest is always in the result of a thing, not in the thing itself. It is it is unnational to regard any activity, be it what you will, as an end of itself. In itself, unnational to live your life without having any purpose, to leave all to chance. Unnational to get harmless pleasure out of nature. The nation has taken all that is in nature and made of it the loose pages of the textbook of ethics, which you shall advance the higher moral life. The national religion is that we have already seen is teleological in its aim. In each of its regulations, it has the ethical norm in view. The entire universe, in the nation's eyes, is something that has been made in accordance with a plan. This is one of the differences between Judaism and heathenism. As Hin Salango, the heathens all have the endless and eternal past, which is in the world and develops with it the laws of necessity. But God of the nation was outside of the world, which He created as an act of free will. So this kind of biased, duplicitous was how this way was how Yahweh came into the picture to create this nation to begin with, to be to himself be ego indulgent, jealous, to be take part in time and be partial amongst people. This is how they think one should act, because it's how God is. And so, but God is really them. They made the fire and said God made it. They made the word and said God made it. They made the temple and said God made it, or whatever. So it really doesn't matter. They win a war. They say God won the war. It's all part of the plan. Trust the plan. The invisible hand to get the wealth of nations. Suck the breast of princesses, as Isaiah foretold. And when they give you money and you can't pay it back, you say, "What? You just want us to get pushed in the sea?" But when you borrow money, can't pay it back. Well, you shouldn't have borrowed it. Always for their own side. Always biased. Always arguing from their own position. To just treat fairness and justice like it doesn't matter, because if you're not part of the nation, you're not a people, and if you're not people, then you can beat your cows, your cow, so it doesn't really matter. It's part of the inheritance. And so there was these Karaites in Russia, and I don't know if it's like they say it is. I think it was a big show, like as I don't think it's a big show. I'm just quoting what Mel Brooks said. Mel Brooks, he does a song where it's like, the Inquisition, what a show, the Inquisition, and synchronized swimmers and everything. And so, they do like the, kind of thing. And I don't know if, because Ferdinand and Isabella paid for the thing supposedly, but they didn't have any money. But they knew some guy who was a banker and had a bunch of gold from clipping coins, so that was enough. He bought some jewels, and Ferdinand and then Isabella's jewels did it or something. I don't know, but they could have been working with these people. I mean, they were working with Columbus, and Columbus was, according to them, part of their religion, so because their religion isn't even a religion, because they want you to believe this idea that it's part of a different nature. So even if they're at the atheists and agnostics, God's still on their side because they're of a different nature. And that nature is better than you. Right? So the Spanish, they were really bad for this exceptionalism, and a lot of people that aren't even exceptional believe that they're quite exceptional. And the Germans, somebody could be from Germany and think that they were part of Christianity for 2,000 years because they don't know history. Because Germans were Johnny come lately to Christianity. It was a Roman thing. It wasn't until Gregory the Great. But just the same, if the Kazakhstanis or whatever didn't get Judaism until the 10th century or whatever, it's pretty similar. But 1,000 years later, you can't tell them that. You can't say, well, actually, just because your grandfather was doing it, you don't really know if your great grandfather was or much about that, and you don't really pick that apart. But Judas Maccabees would have you believe that. He'd have you believe that, oh, it's been thousands and thousands of years. Every generation, he doesn't know. He doesn't have proof of thousands of generations. And so he plays on words because his grandfather was a rabbi. So my grandfather was reading an original text. So your brain thinks, whoa, so his grandfather meaning 3,000 years. And in the original text, the text he's reading from must have been around 3,000 years ago. But none of that's true. Like, his grandfather was a rabbi, so he read from the Masoretic. Just as a German person whose father could be a Lutheran priest or Lutheran pastor or whatever they call them in Lutheran, and he read from the Bible in the Luther Bible in German or whatever. I mean, we're splitting hairs. We're only talking about a few hundred years or whatever. It doesn't really even matter. It was hundreds of years ago. It's not really relevant. But yeah, Martin Luther had a funny hat. He's done some really funny things. He was very influential, a great man, but really tragic. And he spent the rest of his life just eating his words and walking back things and saying some petty kind of mean things, and because he wasted his life thinking it really mattered or someone's going to change their religion or he said, oh, What's the point of me just teaching Christian to a bunch of Christians when Jesus taught it to the nation? How about I go try to teach these people that only started believing this religion because they hated us, that they're going to start believing something that they purposely decided not to believe. And how much sense does that make? But when they spread out, there was already a church in the Levant, started by a guy named Isaac Luria. And so around the time that people were getting expelled from Spain, there's this guy Ashkenaz, Isaac Luria, Ari, and he was an Ashkenazi, a Karaite. He wasn't part of this tradition of Ladino and Moroccan and Spanish. So as a bunch of people got kicked out of Spain, here he's learning Kabbalah and Talmud and stuff like that. And so he started a church in Levant. But most of the Levantine people of the nation were Sephardics, and the Sephardics got kicked out of Spain. So they and this was after Rashi, that's Rabbi Yitzchak, that's Maimonides, Rambam, Rabbi Moses, Ben whatever. This is after them, and those guys came from Spain, the same place where the Moroccans had given the Kabbalah and things, and so and Rashi, of course, before that, and even Maimonides, but it's the same. It's within a few hundred years, and it's the same trickle coming up through there, and the Kabbalah was really where it hit its fever pitch, but this all moved over to the Levant, and then there was all of them got kicked out of Spain, and these wasn't people whose ancestors were 3,000 years Israelites. This is or 2,000 years Israel or whatever it was. This was people that were Berbers that hated Romans and Christians, and were using it as an undercut, one, to oppose Christianity, two, to be able to sell things to the Islamic princes that they liked. And this is how a lot of them even learned German, because there had been some that had went over and learned German to sell women and things like that, and sugar and stuff to Germans, so that's where probably Yiddish comes from, to merchandise to and to convince Germans. And so they had built this church in the Levant or whatever, Isaac Luria and the Sephardics, and this is when the Ashkenazi started learning some of the esoteric kind of stuff, and this is when after the course of a couple hundred years, less than, you have the prosperous Ottoman Empire, and amongst them, their good buddies Sabbatai Tzvi, who is part of this movement to oppose Christianity, to bring on the end times and things like that. And that's what they're using this war with Hamas and stuff for is try to make people think of the end times. They want to do all these rebuilding the temple to get your mind to big end times, end of the world, mark of the beast, all this kind of stuff, kind of try to dupe your mind, to try to, uh, you know, get you, when you start seeing all these, uh, you know, people dropping left and right, you would think, oh, this isn't some conspiracy, and this is actually, God doing this when they're doing it, and they would say, oh, this, just trust the plan, this is God, and it's so reminiscent of the way that was structured, since long ago, because that's kind of the playbook to do something and then say God did it, and get people to believe you, and inherit the nations. But Jesus didn't want to inherit the nations by force, or like they wanted him to inherit the nations. Um, it was just those that were his children listen to his voice, and if you have the Son, you have the Father, and that was kind of a cut, because whoever wrote the New Testament probably knew that the temple was about to be destroyed or was already destroyed, so they knew that was a cut. That these things have been decided, that there was no more of the old ways, and the reasons were so resounding that it became folk religion, and that was weird enough that you have people undercutting that and using that. So you have all these pop-up people of the nation, you have Islam, you have all these other weird things coming out of this decision to double down on replacement theology, to try to be like, oh, this is the end of this religion, and whatever the reason was political, like it was expedient for them to not have a problem like the Greeks had, the Seleucids had with the Maccabees, and all that zealotry. So to spiritualize it and everything, not only, I wouldn't say that that makes it a lie, because the truths aren't based on facts. It doesn't matter if Jesus was a real person. It is a truth that God doesn't want you to be racist and to sacrifice your children and all these other things. That God isn't judging us, and things like that. Like for the way He made us, and a million other things that were supposed to be cuts, and that was why they wrote it in the first place. And it's resounding, like, I mean, for the people that are evangelicals, it's like, you even read the New Testament, because I think that's what. But you have pastors that won't say anything like what I've said, so I don't even know if they understand the New Testament. But I think that's what the New Testament is. Like, I think the New Testament is supposed to be the end of the temple. For those that have ears, let them hear. Let those that know have understanding. They can't say those written after it happened, because then it wouldn't be prophetic. And if you think that's a ripoff, then the whole Old Testament scriptures rip off, because that was written after it happened. But prophetic is an important part, as a necessary condition for something being divine. So they say it. They say it in veils. They say it in parables. They say, I can't. Y'all already got me messed up. I don't know why I gotta explain all these things. What Gentile means and everything. Why am I doing all this?
Why does anybody know what any of this stuff? I can't. Peace.